Hello and welcome to Conversations. I'm Robin Torres, your host. Our guest today is Mr. Barry R. Grissom. In April 2010, Barry R. Grissom was nominated by President Barack Obama and confirmed by the U.S. Senate in August 2010 to be the U.S. Attorney in the District of Kansas. Mr. Grissom graduated from the University of Kansas in 1977 and the Oklahoma City University School of Law in 1981. He leads an office of 49 assistant U.S. attorneys and 53 support staff working in offices in Wichita, Topeka, and Kansas City, Kansas. His law enforcement priorities for the U.S. Attorney's Office include national security, violent crime, drug trafficking, financial fraud, and crimes against children. Welcome, Mr. Grissom.
Oh, my pleasure.
Okay. Give us a little bit of your background. Were you from Kansas? How did you get to Kansas?
Well, I've been a Kansan since 1972, so I think that finally qualifies me to say I am truly a Kansan. Grew up as a corporate gypsy, kind of bouncing around the country with my family, but after I graduated from high school, my father was transferred to the Kansas City area, which I graduated from high school in Chicago, and I was trying to explain to my friends that I was moving to Shawnee Mission near Prairie Village.
Okay.
They thought I was living somewhere out on the western plains with tumbleweeds blowing down the street. But yeah, we've been here since '72. After high school, I attended Johnson County Community College and received an Associate of Arts from the community college. Went on to the University of Kansas, received a bachelor, took a year off from school, and then decided to go back to law school and attended Oklahoma City University and graduated in 1981.
Okay, and then you began practicing law?
Yes, ma'am. I opened up my own practice in Overland Park. It was a practice, started off like a lot of lawyers when you first hang out your shingle. It was a general practice, but my focus became directed at representing people in employment discrimination cases, whether it be race or gender or age or handicap status. Then it matured into a practice where I dealt with issues of failure of businesses to pay their employees proper overtime. So I did that in the private practice for 20 plus years. And then I had the great fortune of being contacted and ultimately nominated by the President for this position and was confirmed by the Senate in August of 2010 and have been the U.S. Attorney ever since then. Okay,
and you were nominated by our current President.
Our current President, yes. President Barack Obama did me an incredible honor and service to nominate me for this position. And then with the assistance of our two senators, then Senator Brownback and Senator Roberts, they both supported my nomination, so I was able to get through the Senate in fairly quick order.
How does it feel to get that phone call from the President of the United States?
Well, you don't get it from the President. What you do is you get it from your senator or from the recording secretary for the United States Senate. And actually at the time I received the call, because the vetting process, going through the confirmation process, can be quite lengthy. And I had shut my law practice down, so I said to my wife, we may not get another chance like this for a number of years. Let's take a road trip. So we just loaded up and headed west, and we were in Truckee, California, and I got a call early in the morning that I had been confirmed the night before. So we went on to see our daughter out in California, and then turned around and made the long trek back home so I could start the job as soon as possible. But it was very exciting to get the call.
What was the vetting process like?
Well, the vetting process, I recommend it for everyone. It's a very lengthy process where they go through and they check your background. Now that sounds simple, but when you think about having to list all the places where you've worked, all the places where you've been to school, and you have to provide current contact information, all the way back to the time you're 18.
Okay.
It can be a fairly cathartic experience going back and trying to resurrect and find old friends who can say, yeah, I knew him, he was a pretty good guy.
Okay.
But the FBI does the background check, and it takes a number of months because you give them 25 names in effect, and then they ask those folks for more names. So exponentially, you can have 70 or 80 folks that they've interviewed,
Okay.
all across the country, all the way back, like I said, from high school in Chicago to we have some friends in California. I mean, so they ask all your neighbors whether or not you're a good neighbor, those kinds of things.
Right.
But it's a very long process. And then after you go through that portion of the vetting process, then they give the FBI file to members of the Senate Judiciary Committee, and they review it, and then they bring your name up for consideration, hopefully, and as they did in my case, they approve it, and then they send it to the floor of the full Senate to be voted on.
Okay. Wow.
Yeah, it takes a while.
It takes a while.
Yeah.
So you get the call from the governor, I assume, about your nomination, and now you've been selected as the United States Attorney for the District of Kansas. You tell your wife, children.
Yes, I have a couple of grown children. I tell my wife and my grown children, and they're of course thrilled, and they've been part of this whole process as well. You know, they're riding along with me through this vetting process. But I think one of the more interesting moments, of course, my mom and dad knew I was going through it, but when I was first nominated by the president, and I got notice that he was going to formally nominate me, I called my mom, like any good son.
All right.
And I said, Mom, you know, the President of the United States has nominated me to be the next United States Attorney for the District of Kansas. And my mother, like any mother, said, oh, we're so proud of you. We're so proud of you, Barry. Now, what do they do?
Okay.
So I kind of use that story when I go around the state to talk about what we do in our office. As the United States Attorney for the District of Kansas,
Right.
not the state of Kansas.
Okay.
And people say, well, why is that? Well, there are 94 United States attorneys throughout our country.
Okay.
And you say, well, there's 50 states. How does that work? Well, it's because United States attorneys are appointed for each judicial district that they're in.
Okay.
Here in Kansas, the federal judicial district, we are a single judicial district. Same thing in most western states like Colorado, New Mexico, Arizona, Wyoming, Montana.
Okay.
But then when you get states a little bit further east or west, like the state of Missouri, they have two U.S. attorneys because they have the Eastern District of Missouri and the Western District of Missouri. So, and for some reason, Oklahoma has three. I haven't figured that one out yet.
Okay.
But I'm sure politics was somewhere in the wood pile on that years ago. But you are, when you hold this office, you are the chief federal law enforcement officer for your particular judicial district. So, as I like to say, I work for the largest and most powerful law firm in the world,
Correct.
United States Department of Justice, and I have a client who is the largest, most powerful client in the world called the United States government.
Right.
That's who we represent.
Okay.
So,
Well, good. We're going to take a break, but when we come back, we're going to talk about the three divisions
Sure.
within the United States Attorney's Office.
yes, ma'am.
So we're going to come right back. We'll be right back to Conversations in just a moment.
Travel advisories to small business loans, government car auctions to finding a new job. To get information, go to the official source, usa.gov.
Welcome back to Conversations, and I'm here with United States Attorney for the District of Kansas. I'm sorry, Mr. Grissom. Welcome back. Thank you for being with us.
That's quite all right. People do that all the time.
We'll do it.
Sometimes they think I'm the Attorney General, but no, I'm just the U.S.
United
Attorney.
yeah.
Yes.
Now let's talk about the two divisions within your area, and that's the civil and the criminal, and the
Yes,
types
ma'am.
of cases that are heard in each one. But before that, I want to know how many attorneys are working within the United States Attorney's Office?
Yes, ma'am. First of all, there are three offices. Well, we have an office in the federal courthouse in Kansas City, Kansas. We have an office in the federal courthouse in Topeka. And then we have one that is just adjacent to the federal courthouse in Wichita. Of those three offices total, we have 49 assistant United States attorneys, and we have approximately 54, 55 support staff. But the different divisions that we have is, as I said in the last segment, my client is the United States of America.
Right.
So if someone violates the law, and we have folks on the criminal side of the house bring an action against that person because they've committed a violation of federal law, then it's always the United States of America versus Joe Smith or whatever. So we represent the government's interests. When we go to court, we announce when the court is called into session, and I'll call the case, it'll be Barry Grissom, United States Attorney, appearing on behalf of the government.
Okay.
So one side of our house is extremely busy with all the prosecutions that we do, hopefully to make our community throughout our entire district a safer place for all of us to be, protect our property, protect our families. We take that we take it very, very seriously. That other than being on guard as to issues that relate to terrorism, it is absolutely essential that the United States Attorney does everything in his or her power to make sure that the assistant United States Attorneys in their office very, very aggressively and very proactively go after the bad guys.
Okay.
Make life better for all of us.
Right.
The other side of the house, if you will, in the U.S. Attorney's Office represents the government's interest in civil matters. Well, what does that mean? Well, let's say a Marine Corps recruiter is driving down the street in his vehicle going out to recruit someplace, and he's involved in an automobile accident. And someone sues his employer, the United States of America,
right.
Then we have to go in and we defend that civil suit. Or if someone makes an allegation that they've been a victim of some form of medical malpractice at a government-run hospital like Leavenworth, or out in at the facility out in Fort Riley, if they make a claim against the physician, they're making against his employer. Right. So again, we would be involved in defending a case like that. Or if somebody files a claim for Social Security and there's a challenge that whether that person may not be eligible for it, well, again, our client's United States of America. So the civil side of the house is equally as busy, but we don't have as many civil lawyers as we have criminal lawyers, just because the size of the caseload that the criminal lawyers carry.
What is your caseload like? I know it's huge.
Well, it is, and I take some pride in the fact that since I've become the United States Attorney, our caseload has gone up, and that's because we have been very active in reaching out to our law enforcement partners, like the FBI, the DEA, Drug Enforcement Administration, those folks, as well as local law enforcement. I mean, just because we're the federal government, it doesn't mean we walk on water or anything. We're nothing more than partners with our partners who are out in the law enforcement community.
Okay.
One of the things that we've done, and we did this at the direction of Attorney General Holder, unfortunately, last year was the deadliest year for folks who were in law enforcement throughout the country than in over 2 decades. This year, we're on track to beat what we were last year. And what we have found is that in the vast, vast majority of times when a police officer is killed in the line of duty, he is killed by someone who was already a convicted felon.
Okay.
If you are a convicted felon, you can't own a firearm. You can't own ammunition. You can't own an armor vest, a body protecting vest. So what we did at the direction of the Attorney General is we sent a letter out to every chief of police, out to every sheriff's department, out to every county attorney and district attorney throughout the state of Kansas, saying, you know who the bad guys in your town happen to be. The Jones boys, they're always in trouble. They've always been in trouble. They've been away 2 or 3 times, but they got probation or parole, and they were able to come back. Well, if you have someone like that and you find out that they, in fact, own or are in possession of firearms or ammunition, send them to us. Because under federal law, we can take them out of your community for 10, 15, some cases 20 years based on their prior criminal history.
Wow.
And there is no parole in the federal system.
Okay.
If you're supposed to do 10 years, you do 10 years. So we can remove, for lack of a better term, a cancer from a small community. If you take someplace out in western Kansas that maybe has, in a particular county, only 10 or 15,000 people, and in the town, not in the rural setting, you're talking about 2,500, 3,500 people, and you have 2 or 3 bad guys. If you can take them out of that community, you can have a direct impact on making that community safer. Wow. So we've had a real push for that. As a matter of fact, to the point where we've been so busy that it's a little bit unusual. The U.S. Attorney himself is carrying a caseload of handling these felon in possession of gun cases. Okay. But we're very busy right now, to say the least.
Very busy. Okay, I wanted to ask you about your Civil Rights Unit.
Yes, ma'am.
Which in the Civil Rights Unit is human trafficking.
Yes, yes.
Want to talk a little bit about that, because I didn't realize what an issue it was until seeing the movie, and I believe it was called Trafficking or Traffic. I had no idea that this was going on.
It's when first of all, I'm glad you brought up our development of our Civil Rights Unit. One of the things that we've done over the past year is we had, last June, we had the very first Civil Rights Symposium in the District of Kansas that was hosted by our office as well as the Western District of Missouri. We were able to bring in a lot of great speakers. It was open to anybody. It was open to law enforcement. It was open to community groups. Anybody wanted to walk in off the street and be involved in it. And it was very successful. We had it at the Reardon Center here in Kansas City, Kansas. We were able to bring in a fellow who's become my friend and one of my heroes, a guy named Tom Perez. Okay. Just amazing guy. He's the Assistant Attorney General in charge of civil rights for the Department of Justice. He came in the day before, and we spoke on the issue of hate crimes and human trafficking in Wichita to a group of county attorneys and district attorneys. Then he and I drove up here. He had never driven across the plains of Kansas or come through the Flint Hills, so he was amazed by that. And then he spoke here in KCK, was very well received. But out of that, we have developed, there is a gentleman in my office named John Fleener, and John is in charge of the Civil Rights Unit. And it has become a very, very active part of our practice, particularly as it relates to the issues when you talk about human trafficking. A lot of times human trafficking, when people say that, there are misconceptions. Okay. The perception is that you're literally transporting people, or it's usually something that happens in a sweatshop or a brothel someplace on the East Coast or the West Coast. Well, unfortunately, I'm here to tell you that human trafficking, unfortunately, is alive and well right here in the District of Kansas. Human trafficking basically talks about, or is defined as, coercing someone into forced labor, some form of indentured or involuntary servitude, or into performing sexual acts for pay. We just, and I believe the press release was just out this morning, we just arrested and indicted an individual in Wichita yesterday who was involved in attempting to solicit high school girls to become engaged in prostitution and travel around the country with him. Wow. One of these young ladies was brave enough to contact law enforcement that ultimately got in touch with, who worked with us, and we were able to do the things necessary to collect enough evidence to present it to a grand jury so that we could indict this person. Okay. So it's something that happens a lot. Wow. It's as I tell folks, here we are. This is the 150th anniversary of the beginning of the Civil War. And here we are 150 years later, and what we're really talking about is slavery. Right. There's no other way to describe it. It is confining someone against their will to engage in conduct that they're not paid for, or is reprehensible, or is underage. So it's frightening that here we are, like I said, 150 years later, and we're still engaged in it. Yes,
right.
ma'am.
Wow. We're going to take a break.
Okay.
When we come back, we'll finish this conversation because I have another question for you.
All right.
But we have to take a break. So we'll be right back in just a moment with U.S. Attorney Barry Grissom.
Mr. Johnson, it's time to start saving.
This savings wake-up call is brought to you by your friends at Choose to Save.
Thank you for being with us. Conversations. We are back with United States Attorney Barry Grissom. Now, I had one follow-up question that I wanted to finish up with that segment, and that was in the movie of trafficking, they showed the girls thinking that they were going to model. How can young ladies and men now protect themselves from scams like that?
Well, it's really difficult because you're really talking about protecting someone who more often than not isn't in this country.
Okay.
They're coming from someplace else where maybe someone has represented to them, you know, you pay me a fee, I can take you to America, we've got these great jobs, whether it be modeling or doing whatever. And then once they get here, the work that they're put into is not what they agreed to. The people who bring them in now basically say, well, if you don't do what we say, you know, then we'll just turn you over to the police. And most of these folks, particularly from more impoverished countries like the Philippines, like, you know, Central America, Guatemala, someplace like that, they don't come from a country that has a basis of civil rights. They fear their government.
Okay.
So when they're here and someone says, we're going to turn you over to the police or the government, that is a very fearful event for them. And unfortunately, what they don't know is that we have provisions in our law that if someone is here, we don't automatically extradite them or we don't send them away. We have special visas for people who have been victims of human trafficking. One of the challenges in law enforcement dealing with folks who are involved in human trafficking is that you have to develop a level of trust with someone who doesn't trust you at the outset,
right,
for all those reasons I just mentioned. So unlike a normal crime, if you will, we have to not only develop that trust with the person, but also have a safety net there. We have to have some place for them to go. If you go into supposedly a nail salon, which is nothing more than a massage parlor for
right,
sex acts, and there's 7 or 8 ladies there who may are Oriental, who have very broken English at best, don't speak English or communicate clearly. If you go in and now you've in effect rescued them from, well, where do they go?
Right.
You have to have a safety net there. You have to have a place for them to go where they feel safe. They have to have medical attention. They have to have food. So it's a little different kind of prosecution than what you would normally see in prosecuting somebody who's a bank robber.
Right.
It's just different. Very challenging, but by the same token, extremely rewarding. And I know from talking with our assistant United States attorneys, it's a very rewarding part of the job to know that you have literally freed someone from slavery.
Right. So where do they go after they've been rescued?
Well, there are a number of places. We've worked with Catholic Services. We work with different NGOs, different domestic abuse houses. There are safe homes for women who've been involved in domestic battery. We work with those folks so that we'll have a place to at least put someone so that they feel safe, they can be fed if they need medical attention, or in some cases, and a lot of cases, unfortunately, if they need some kind of psychological counseling.
Yes.
And also interpreters. I mean, imagine, again, using my example of the massage parlor scenario where you are someone from Asia and you don't speak any English, and here you are, you're frightened to death, you can't communicate with anybody. We do our best to provide interpreters for those folks to alleviate that concern and to let them know what we're doing to help them,
right,
not to punish them. We're not putting them in prison or in jail. Now, we are certainly interested in putting the human trafficker
right
in jail. That's for darn sure.
When they go, or when they turn these individuals in, How are they protected? And I know you have a victims protection.
We do everything that we can to, I mean, if we don't have someplace to put somebody and we have to, incarcerate them, that is, put them in jail,
Okay.
we put them in a segregated area
Okay.
from people who are criminals, because these folks aren't criminals, they just need someplace to be safe. And then, of course, there are federal laws against witness tampering or trying to interfere with somebody who might be providing information in a federal case. So if we hadn't yet arrested the trafficker, as an example, and the trafficker can still communicate with that person who we've saved from their situation, if he or she tries to intimidate them in any way, they've just upped the ante.
Okay.
They now have new federal charges that will be brought against them for interfering with a witness in a federal prosecution.
Okay. Now, if they feel like they've been victimized, how would they contact or file a complaint?
Well, typically, and again, that's another aspect that's so challenging about issues that relate to human trafficking, is there is this, most folks automatically say, well, gee, why didn't they just walk away? There's the door, it's not barred, why didn't they just leave? They didn't leave because of being coerced. I mean, the big example is someone who is physically coerced, but more often than not, it's psychologically coerced. Again, going back to, okay, well, if you want to leave, then I'll call the cops. And that person believes that if the police are brought in, they're going to go to jail.
Right.
So, if someone finds themselves, someone who does speak the language, someone, as an example, human trafficking is just not foreigners. Human trafficking can be bringing people into prostitution rings, bringing women into prostitution rings, especially, and I say, I used to always use the word young women, but that's not. Children.
Children, yes.
If you're under 18, you are a child. And when we see 14, 15, and 16-year-olds being utilized by pimps or human traffickers, people always say, gee, why didn't they just walk away? And it's so much more complex than just walking away.
Okay.
Because they didn't come from maybe your background or my background to where we would have the gumption to do that. They come from a different place, and we have to understand that.
Okay.
And usually when they're rescued and the dust is settled and they are no longer fearful of their trafficker, and more often than not, they want to come to court on sentencing day. They want to tell the court how that trafficker stole their childhood,
Right.
or made them untrusting of all men in the world because of what that person put them into. The court needs to hear that from a sentencing standpoint, and it's also a very cathartic experience for those victims to be able to come in and articulate just what they've had to.
Been through.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, for anyone who, for any other civil rights complaints, they would file a complaint through your office.
Typically what happens is there is the EEOC,
Okay.
the Equal Opportunity Commission, and you can file a charge of discrimination under what's called Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. We all remember those great pictures of Dr. King
Right.
in the Lincoln Memorial. Well, after President Kennedy was assassinated, Lyndon Johnson was able to get through the Civil Rights Act of 1964, an incredible landmark piece of legislation. They can contact the EEOC. In Kansas, we have the KHRC, Kansas Human Rights Commission. You can file with them as well. And typically those are private rights of action, where you go to find folks like me when I was in private practice, where I represented folks in discrimination cases. But if it's something that is of a magnitude where it affects a large number of folks, or let's say it's a police misconduct case where someone, what they refer to as under the color of state law. In other words, I have the authority of the law and I misuse that authority in some way that discriminates against you or attempts to deprive you of your property or your liberty interest, then those are cases that our office would look at specifically in conjunction with, now I'll add this, is in conjunction with the Department of Justice in D.C. I mean, they have teams, not a perfect analogy, but like when they got Osama bin Laden and they sent in SEAL Team 6.
Right.
Well, we kind of have SEAL teams back at DOJ
Okay.
who are they specialize in like a civil rights issue or environmental crimes, things of that nature, to where they are extremely helpful to U.S. attorneys and their staffs out in the field to come in and give us the backup and the support necessary to prosecute any of those kinds of cases.
Okay. Well, thank you for being with us. And there is so much more I needed to ask you, but we ran out of time.
I'll always come back.
You're welcome back.
All
exactly.
right.
Well, thank you for being with us today.
My pleasure.
And thank you for being with us on Conversations, and we'll see you next time.